Welcome to the North Group podcast. At North Group, we are invited into organizations to influence leadership and organizational behavior. It is absolutely fascinating work. Today, we invite you into one of those conversations.
Welcome to the North Group podcast. My name is Jerry Murray, and I'm happy to host today's podcast. We are here with Brian Black at North Group's world headquarters in beautiful Lidditz, Pennsylvania, overlooking the Lidditz Springs Park. And I am excited to talk to my good friend Brian today. Brian is not just a partner at North Group, he is an absolute expert in the areas of succession planning, estate planning, charitable giving, and trust work. But much more than that, he's someone that you can't leave an experience with without just feeling how the light shines through him and feeling cared for. He is a husband, a father, a community member, and a friend, and I am just really thankful to be with him today. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Jerry. It's a real gift to be with you. Thanks, brother.
Yeah, you bet. And we all know Brian as this person that's so competent in the work that he does, and internally here at North Group, we knock on his door regularly for advice and thoughts. I did it just this week, and he provided some great wisdom for me. But what's really interesting is Brian, like all of us, has this bigger story, and we experience something more with Brian, but we might not know that Brian views his life as one that's being transformed, and there's no greater crucible of transformation than hard seasons of life. Yeah. And today we are going to highlight two of those hard seasons that Brian has experienced and how that transformational work has been done through him during those seasons. One, when his wife of 28 years, Laurie, passed away, the process from diagnosis through her passing. Yeah. And another season, which was just an intense season of work that actually led to, what Brian might describe as clinical burnout. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And both just fascinating times, and look forward to hearing those stories. So thank you, Brian, for being willing to share today.
Yeah, Jerry, I'm grateful. I mean, it's such a big part of the story of my life, my family's life, and really has rippled into the world around me in ways that I never imagined God would use. So hard though they were, grateful for what God has done and is still doing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, to know Brian, you realize he's gifted, and you can't help but just to wonder where all this came from and where the vision for his life came from. And so maybe we could just start back even before getting into those stories to some of the formative years in the 70s. Brian, as you think back to those times, if you could just describe kind of who you were, what your interests were in those formative years, and maybe any snippets, events, or individuals in your life that impacted those passions and visions.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I think my life, like a lot of our lives, is characterized by events and people that God has used that often we never even knew to ask for, but God knew. And I think that's the story of my journey. I grew up in a small town about an hour east, outside of a small town called Spring City, Pennsylvania. But my father was a small business owner, was an insurance broker, an agent, a realtor, and was just very well respected in this little area that I grew up in. And so when I look back and I think about the life that was formed in me, I recognize the influence of being in that community where my father was a caregiver for so many people. He was a person that just people trusted. And I watched him serve people day upon day. People trust him in that. And that's the model that I received really, really young. I'd walk around town.
You learn from example often more so than words or books.
100%. And my father's nickname was Blackie, our last name being Black. And when I was a kid, people would say, "Oh, you're Blackie's son, you're Blackie's son." And when I was really young, I didn't like hearing that. Like, no, I'm Brian. And as I grew and came to understand the impact of my father's modeling, I realized, I am Blackie's son. And it's impacted me to this very day.
Yeah.
So those formative years for me that really were launching me forward had this sense of service, this sense of rootedness, this sense of being part of something bigger than yourself, and really just finding something that you could enjoy and do well. And the second thing I think that really formed me deeply when I was 14 years old. This is kind of a crazy story,
Wow.
but we were attending church, our regular church, and the pastor of the church called me into his office one day and sat me down and said, "Brian, I see God's hand on your life in a way that I've never..."
At 14 years
At
old.
14, that I've never seen. I remember the words, "I've just never seen this the way I'm experiencing it in you." And I'm not patting myself on the back.
Right.
This was someone who was just speaking into my life. And he started calling me into a deeper relationship with God at 14. And all my friends were running around, chasing girls. And not that I wasn't chasing girls,
Right.
but somehow that voice of him in my life at 14 really set this path that somehow there was this sense of call that I didn't know what to do with. And I wasn't clear what it meant, but it was always there from the time I was that age.
Well, how long did you stay in touch with this pastor? Does he know where you've gone with that vision?
Oh, absolutely. It was fun because that wasn't just a conversation, it was a relationship. And so through those years, as I went to high school, he was still the pastor there, still nurturing me. When I went off to college, he moved to another congregation, but we stayed in touch. And we often talked about the influence that he had on my life, and I was grateful, and I felt like I was given the gift of someone that took a nudge from God and followed through.
Right,
Yeah.
right, because he could have, responded to that nudge or just forgotten about it. I'm sure he was busy as a pastor.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That is a gift.
So I went to high school, and maybe this is where we're going here.
Yeah.
I went into high school with this real belief that I was a good student, I had a good model, I had a sense of call in my life, and I had this sense that I was going to go into medicine. And so off I go into high school, and I did college in my senior year of high school, part-time, so I was trying to get a head start and really believed that's the place that God was calling. Head off to med school, help people, care for people, be trustworthy, and answer the call.
All great calls.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
When I went off. So that led me, as I went through high school, to think, I want to go to med school, and I want to serve the Lord through medicine. So I picked a college, Franklin or Marshall, which is how I wound up in Lancaster County, growing up in Chester County.
We're thankful for Franklin and Marshall.
Well, I am too. I picked a college where I could. They had a great medical school admission percentage, number one. They had a great science and liberal arts program, and I was interested in both. And I could swim there. They were Division III schools. So I picked it for a number of reasons. Plus, it was pretty close to where the woman that would become my wife was going to college. And I thought it'd be handy to be a little close when we're dating.
Wow, that's even more than the trifecta, right?
Exactly. So I double majored in college, degrees in chemistry and English. And I really had this sense that this is where I'm going. I'm going to go to med school. I'm ready to go. And back in the back of my mind, though, is there's this sense that I'm running a little bit. Am I running from the call that God had on my life?
Wow.
Yeah. Something really pivotal happened when I was a sophomore in college, and this is what started to spark this. Sophomore year, living my life in college, phone rings, another pastor calls, the successor pastor to the pastor from the church that I grew up in. He's now in Lancaster. He had now moved to Lancaster and said, "Would you be willing to come and work with our youth, with our young people?" And everything in my spirit wanted to say, no, and somehow I just felt nudged to say yes. So as a sophomore in college, another pastor brought me in to his little team. I started working with the middle school and high school kids, small group, 15, 20 kids, and started my journey in ministry while I was in college.
Brian, you're in college. You have 2 majors. You're swimming, and yet you respond to that call with an affirmative answer.
Yeah.
Did you count the cost? Was it just a blind faith that led you to say yes?
Yeah. No, I think in the early days it was just blind faith, and it wasn't counting the cost. But over time, that's where God really got a hold of me, and I began to hear God's voice in a different way in my life. So that informs a little bit of the journey forward.
Yep.
That combination of I'm heading this way, but God's gotten a hold of me in a different way. Is a little bit of the story of my entire journey.
Yeah, thank you. So you proceed through Franklin and Marshall, and you graduate from that institution. Tell us about your early years in your career.
Yeah, the early years of my career were a gift because I was thinking I was going to med school, but through a series of events, had a strong sense that med school wasn't the direction I was going. That actually It was law school where I could serve people best, where I could care for families,
Yeah.
where I could deal with the technical pieces that I liked. And so my career shifted, and I headed off to law school instead of med school. But my experience in Lancaster, and there's a lot of story underneath this, my experience in Lancaster, I had the opportunity to get to know some attorneys while I was on my journey of college and immediately post-college. And I went off to law school already believing that the place for me was to come back to Lancaster County and work with family-owned businesses, work with family systems, work with people that were generous and entrepreneurial. And so when I headed off to law school, that's where I believed I was coming back. So I graduated from law school, Villanova Law School, and my classmates are heading to New York and Boston and Washington and, all over the country.
Yeah.
And they say, "Where are you going?" I say, "Well, I'm going to Lancaster." And the almost universal response was, "What are you going to do there?"
Yeah.
God knew what I was going to do there.
Yeah.
And came back to Lancaster when I graduated from law school. And again, had the gift of landing at a law firm with a mentor who was working with some of the largest influential families in Lancaster County. And here's this young guy, doesn't have a clue what to do but carry his briefcase, who wound up having the privilege of being in the room with people that had resource and generosity and were making an impact. And I just got bitten, smitten really, by the opportunity to serve families in that way. So my early career was being well mentored and watching a law practice grow as a young guy was given opportunity he had no business really having. God orchestrated that, and it just continued to grow and grow and grow.
Wow. Some of these affirmative answers that you gave to come back to Lancaster or to lead a youth group seemed like they were yes answers, even though you didn't know how it would go on the other side. So you were acting in faith. Yeah. Do you how do you recall your early measures of success at that time? Was it about just learning and enjoying the process, or did you believe that would maybe lead to something that you were looking for?
That's a great question. I think admittedly, and this is looking back, of course, at the time, it wasn't clear to me. Admittedly, I had my head down. Yeah. And it was push and grow and go. Yeah. And, there's this part of the story of my life is that God has a way of sending a storm to rescue from something where I might be running. It sounds a little bit like Jonah, doesn't it? And so, admittedly, Jerry, I was not sitting in that season of my life with clear principles and clear measures of success that were kingdom focused. And it was really head down, professional excellence, serve people well, but not a lot of self-care, not a lot of real sense of really how to sit with God in the midst of this in those early years.
Right. So your yeses were significant. As you continued in your early career, I would know that you were an attorney with growth and competency and responsibility and impact and influence. You were also a bivocational pastor who would preach on Sundays and care and shepherd for many people in your church and community. Yeah. And you were a husband, and you're a dad of 4 wonderful kids, and involved in the life of your family. If we would fast forward to the point, you were an attorney, family life was good. Maybe you were a little overcommitted, and this first storm that we're going to talk about hit. How would you introduce that and maybe just carry us through that journey?
Yeah, Jerry, that's, you think when you go to bed at night, and I think this is true for all of us, you would just believe that the next day is going to be just another day. Yeah. And I think that's how most of us pull our covers up at night. And there was a day, it was a Thursday, when that next day wasn't like any other day. And, the day that my wife, Laurie, was diagnosed with terminal ovarian cancer is a day that is locked in our whole family story, but certainly in my heart and mind. And, when you get that diagnosis and you hear the words, we can treat it, but we can't cure it. There's seasons that you go through, and I would simply say there's a few seasons that are really clear and I think can be helpful even maybe to others that are listening when you think about what happens when you enter a storm. The first season for us was just a whirlwind. What's going on? What are we going to do? Who do we trust? What path are we going to take? What's this mean? How do we communicate this? Oh, millions of questions. And as we walk through that, eventually you get through that season. I think this is true for everybody. And you begin to get on a path. Mm-hmm. And the path is, this is how we're going to fight this. This is how we're going to move forward as a family, as a couple. This is what life's going to look like as we do battle. And I would say in that journey, none of us would have raised our hands and say, this is what I would love, this deep, deep challenge in my life, this wilderness experience. But I would say that along the way is a number of things that happened that I think are just gifts that God gave us in the midst of it that become even more gift as you look back. Mm. One of it is that God showed up in ways that we wouldn't even know to ask for. Mm. And the primary way, not the only way, but the primary way he showed up was through people. And often through people who didn't ask for permission, mm-hmm. didn't call and say, hey, would it be okay if, but simply responded to whatever nudge God had for them. Wow. And I can recall over and over again how we just felt God showing up in the midst of our family. For one day going to the kitchen sink and looking out the window, and just a Saturday morning, and out along the back fence row were a bunch of women that had showed up from church, and they were just deadheading flowers and pulling weeds and just cleaning up. They didn't call. Mm-hmm. They just came. Yeah. And so God's showing up in ways we didn't know to ask for became the theme of that battle, mm-hmm. that journey. The other thing that I think was so powerful was watching Laurie's journey with cancer and with God along the way. Mm-hmm. I often say that she made it easy for me because she, over time, God just got a hold of her in ways that were so real and so authentic that at 2 a.m, in racking pain, she was the same person that you would have seen at 10 a.m, all cleaned up, sitting up and greeting folks. Yeah. And what a gift to my soul mm-hmm. to watch and experience the gift of God's presence in her life, the gift of faith that he gave her. Mm-hmm. She said to me as she was getting near the end of her life, she said, if I could orchestrate the end of my life, I would want to die with just you and me and the Lord. So I don't want the kids to have to keep vigil. I just want this to be something very just about us. And God gave us that gift. She had a 4.5-year battle, and she had such hope, such faith, such grace, such ease, even in the last days of her life. Mm-hmm. That journey has changed me in ways in every single aspect of my life. As a father, as a now remarried husband, as someone that gets to be a friend or to sit with clients who are friends, every single aspect of that journey.
Brian, describe a few of those ways that where transformation hit.
Yeah. There's an account in Mark chapter 4 in the scriptures where Jesus gets in the boat with the disciples and says, let's go to the other side. Yeah. And then they hit a storm. Many of us know the story. They hit a fierce storm. They're all panicked and they wake Jesus up. And ultimately they're fearing for their life, but he calms the storm and they say, who is this? Mm-hmm. Right? And I know that story. Many of us know that story well. And I always thought, well, it's interesting. Jesus is sleeping. That's interesting. I wonder why he's sleeping. But through this experience, transformation, I'll never understand that story the same way again. And that is, our journey was very similar, where the storm came and we knew, we think we're going to die. And in fact, it was death that was the end result. And in the middle of, there's this sense of panic, God, don't you care? If you really loved us, this wouldn't be happening to us. Mm-hmm. And if you really cared, you would fix it. And that account God used in our marriage and our life, and still today, to transform the fact that the truth was Jesus was right there in the boat, mm-hmm. in the storm, The Son of God was in the boat. And I'll tell you, that for me, for us, became such a transforming piece, this sense that God is present even when you don't sense in any way that he is.
Yeah.
He's there. The second thing that this cancer journey does, and I think it would seem obvious, but it's much deeper than the obvious, which is there is a gift, even though it doesn't feel like gift at the time, in recognizing the brevity and recognizing that life is going to end. Mm-hmm. And it attenuated everything for us, not just getting treatment and going after cure, but it attenuated conversations. It heightened the value of just sitting around with our kids and having real conversations.
Yeah.
It heightened the value of taking a walk and actually, no joke, feeling the sun on our faces and just being grateful. And the transforming power of recognizing that our lives are all but a vapor, but really knowing it in tangible ways, while it doesn't feel like gift, is gift. And that part of our journey, our kids, I believe, as much as, of course, there's grief and there's pain, they receive the gift from that. And even to this day as adults, I believe that part of the gift of that cancer journey continues for them.
Yeah, every day.
Absolutely.
As you think back to what it was like to continue to, just live in the world during that time, to go to work, to go to church, to be a parent, to handle the mundane. Do you have any particular memories of just what it felt like and how you would draw on that strength that you described?
Boy, yeah, there's so much there. I would say that for me, as much as work could be hard at times, I did step out of ministry at that point when the diagnosis occurred. But there was a gift to be surrounded with supportive colleagues and even clients. And one of the things, this was both in my law practice and here at North Group, the thing that has been an incredible gift, and I'm using that word a lot because it really is gift. It's not grabbed or taken, it's given, is the depth of care that others have when you're willing to let them in and when you're willing to ask. And so I had lots of hard days at work, lots of days when I was tired, lots of days when I wished I wasn't there, lots of days that, I knew it was sitting in front of us. All those things were true. But on balance, God had put me in environments where I was surrounded with colleagues who truly cared about my family and cared about me, clients who cared about me and my wife and our family's well-being in ways that I can't even describe to you. So I don't know if I've answered your question quite, but the season was hard, but God somehow, and I don't want to overly spiritualize it, but really it's what it is. God turned it into something that we didn't know to ask for.
Right.
And even through places that we wouldn't even know to go.
Seems like a very faith-affirming season. Things you didn't know to ask for, but you were taken care of. Things that you received as gifts that you didn't know you needed. And also an awakening in the moment, in each moment, to say, wow, this is something that I can appreciate, or this is something that I can fully experience. But in recognizing the brevity, maybe not to stay in any one moment too long.
And, when I narrate this, of course, there were hard moments. There were tears. There was pain.
Understood.
There was a sense of not knowing what to do. All those things were present. So I have the gift of being able to look back a little bit as well, but nevertheless, even not just looking back, in the midst of it, everything I've just shared, that's the God we serve. That's the people often that we get surrounded with that are gift.
Laurie passed away in May of 2015.
That's right.
Yeah. And then there was a season of firsts, which is part of an extension of that season. Do you remember any moments of?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think when there's loss, everybody reacts to loss. We all react to loss differently. Someone said to me early on, grief is like a fingerprint. It's unique for everyone, and I didn't quite understand that at the time. I think I have a little more understanding now that is true. But what I would say is one of the things that I remember is our first Christmas. And here we, think about Christmas often as one of those big firsts. And I remember this was May to December, and I remember sitting, and of course now it's me and the 4 kids, and thinking, how much do we bring mom into Christmas? Do we not talk about mom? Do we talk about mom? And some people who love me dearly, who had lost spouses along the way, said something to me that I've never forgotten, and I would say to people today that are on the journey of loss, and that is that the storytelling and being able to take those firsts and bring, in this case, Laurie, into the story was an important part of our first journey. Not to act like they weren't there or she wasn't there, but in fact to celebrate how she was present there.
Yeah.
Do you remember how mom would have passed out the presents?
Right.
We got to do it the way mom would do. Yeah. Those kind of conversations became really important for us, because she's woven into our story. So let's keep those stories alive because they're true and they're part of who we are. So that was an important part of our journey at first. The other thing that I think is almost universally true, people will often say to me, oh, well, today's your wedding anniversary, so I bet that's a really hard day. And a lot of people will tell you, this is my experience, it's often not the days that you think it will be that will hit you in ways you don't expect. And so I could walk past a wedding anniversary, and not that I wouldn't feel it at all, but then I would be driving in the car, just driving in the car 2 weeks later, and for no reason just feel this sense of wave come over me, and there might be tears, there might be some type of emotion that came from nowhere. And that's the journey. And I think the counsel I give people that I journey with in this, clients as well, is like when you're in that season, sit with that. Allow that to be what it is. Don't try to climb out of something. You're in a wilderness. Stay in the wilderness. Let God do what God needs to do.
Brian, one thing that I recognize about you as a man, as a friend, and I experience with you regularly, is that you've got the guts to dive into what's hard, and so you don't avoid conversations about those places. And maybe it's been sourced out of understanding the value of that in these transformation seasons. But I love that because it's not only, I would assume, a gift to you, but it's a gift to the people around you too, that know that you welcome them and you're caring for them and how you engage in conversations around these things.
Yeah. I appreciate you noting that. I'd like to think that's the journey that I'm on.
Yeah.
I don't do it perfectly, but I do think there is the influence of that deep season of pain. And the gift, again, using that word maybe more than I should, but the opportunity to have the conversations that matter while you have time to have them. And so, as you know, in our work with clients, families, many wonderful folks, but like any family, like any business organization, there are conversations that we are having, and then there may be conversations that we should be or wish we could have. And I know that our work with clients often says, how do we build a bridge, not just from the conversations that we are, but to the ones that we wish we could or should have. And so I'd say my journey has given me perhaps a little more conviction or maybe a little more courage in that space, because I know, as we all do, the power of the trust and the cohesion and the understanding that's built around those harder conversations. I look back on our journey together through cancer, and what made Laurie's passing, I'll say, easier, if I may say that, but even in retrospect, was we didn't leave anything on the table.
Yeah.
Because God gave us time. And by His grace, we used it, not perfectly, but we used it to get to places that we never would have gotten, I believe, had we believed we've got all the time in the world.
Yeah. And often we find that there's hope that actually grows as we lean into those places.
Yeah.
May of 2015, and a season that continued for a period. And there were, over the next few years, certainly you would have had many different experiences, but it was during that time that an idea was birthed to create and be a founding partner in another professional services company, even while you were full-time at North Group. Maybe really wherever you would want to take that, but just describe those next few years.
Yeah. Well, I have the privilege of being your partner and the partner with some other fine people here at North Group.
The privilege is mine.
And along the way, I had this, I call it a holy discontent. That's just my way of thinking about it, that we serve clients so well in the consulting area that we do, but there is this need for faith-filled, particularly faith-filled, but just clients and families to be well served on the legal side. And there's plenty of good lawyers in Lancaster County, but there was this sense that we could do it in a way that would be in alignment with how we at North Group believe people should be cared for and served. So we birthed this vision. We did it together of a law firm.
Yeah.
And on November 1st, 2017, we kicked off this venture with a partner. Partner Tim Schwarn and I partnered, and we called it Legacy Law. We didn't put our name on it. The idea was Legacy Law was really what this was about. Yeah. And I was excited about it. There was a lot of energy, as there is around a lot of new things. I find in my life I get energy from new things. I like to start things. I like to cast vision. I think you do too. I enjoy that process. And off we go, and we start running. And, I'm coming into this believing that slowly God will build this. We have a good model. We're going to do good work, and they will come. Well, things came faster and more furious in a wonderful way than we ever expected. And so we had full plates, and I was expecting I was going to do very little legal work and mostly all consulting work, and I was still doing consulting work and doing very much legal work.
Wow.
And as we all know, all good things, great things actually. But in the midst of it, what began to happen was, and I think this is true for a lot of us, that self-care, and I mean self-care in every respect, rest, reflection, good health habits, exercise, activity, began to get pushed out. My doing by filling my plate beyond capacity on a steady basis. And you do that for time after time. After a while, it begins to take a toll. So I would often hear people talk about, I feel burned out. I had no idea, Jerry, what that term really meant. I knew conceptually. But I reached a point about 2 years, perhaps 2.5 years into it, to this journey of legacy law, where I realized, my emotions are razor thin. I'm tired. I don't have any margin in my emotional tank. And it was a frightening time, almost frightening is the word I would use, because in those moments you realize, I don't even recognize myself.
Wow.
And that's why I use the term burnout. No, nobody diagnosed it clinically, but I'm going to say if that isn't burnout, I don't know what burnout could possibly be. Thankfully, I'm surrounded with good partners here at North Group and in my marriage. I had the opportunity to remarry. Yeah. And in that journey of remarrying, and by the way, my wife, Viji, she was part of the startup of Legacy Law. She was with us on that journey. So she's walking along as we're getting started, and she sees what's going on in my life. And she sees, at night, she sees in the morning, she sees the reality. And she took it seriously. And I'm grateful for that. So did all of you as my partners. The desire to care for what was true and not ignore it and not just push through it was the second piece of my life, I think, where God has really done some transforming work through that season. That pushed me, through the encouragement of my wife and a few others, to join a cohort of people at what's called the Transforming Center. And that Transforming Center was a cohort of about 80 leaders from around the country. We started meeting quarterly in cohorts out near Chicago for 3-day retreats, silence and solitude. And I resisted that. It's a program. I don't want to do a program. I just need to pull the reins back. I just need to self-manage this. But I really needed more than just a tweak. And so beginning this journey of retreats, 3 days with the Lord, 3 days silence and not all silence and solitude, but some teaching around spiritual practices with other leaders, pastors and other leaders, all of whom came in exhausted. And the very first retreat, the leader of the retreat said, the very first invitation that I believe God is extending to all of you is an invitation to rest. And part of me resisted that.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean rest? I came here to do something. I came here to figure out how to get through this burnout. Like, this is another thing on my to-do list. And in the next breath,
That's funny.
I just had tears going down my eyes, just
wow.
tears down my face when I recognized, yeah, Jesus, Matthew 11, come to me. If you're weary or heavy laden, then I'll give you rest. And I heard those words as spoken to my heart by him. And that began a 2.5-year journey of slowly learning to sit with God, to rest, to enjoy Sabbath, to sit quietly with God in the morning, and to slowly just allow him to fill the space that he needed to fill in my life. I sit here today with that in the rearview mirror, not the practices in the rear view, but that experience. And it's the second thing in my life I would say. I would have never raised my hand and said, I would love a good case of burnout. That would be really good for my soul. But the net effect is I sit with so many leaders who are wonderful, gifted men and women with vision and purpose. Their why is clear, and they're exhausted. Mm-hmm. They're exhausted.
Brian, I don't think you could overstate how much you were carrying during that season. You are highly sought after for your consulting expertise. You're just wonderful to be around, and people, look for times just to seek you out in the hallway. But then you were a founder of an organization. You were in startup mode. Everything, every choice, every doorknob and paint color of founding an organization, and then you were one of the primary deliverers of service in that organization. Mm-hmm. That you would work here during the day and you would work in another at night and then wake up before coming back and continue working. And it wouldn't take long for any human being to have some feels related to that, even if they were as gifted as you. Do you recall what some of the symptoms, the first symptoms were that you might have felt that this just isn't sustainable, even as the momentum and the weight of responsibility, caused you to believe you needed to continue?
Yeah, there's several things that were really started to scream at me. I mean, one was I love the work that I've been called into. Not every moment is wonderful. Mm-hmm. Some are really challenging,
sure.
but the why for what we do and the privilege of who we get to do it with is absolutely wonderful, and I'm grateful for it. And I began to feel like every responsibility, every meeting that I had, every phone call that I had, every interaction felt like an interruption. Mm-hmm. It felt like it was pushing on me rather than receiving it with thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. I almost resented. Yeah. And that feeling of resentment, like, that weight, that was a symptom that was foreign to me. Yeah. And I began to recognize that in me. With that, and I mentioned, is the emotional bandwidth. Most of us at our best operate on an emotional bandwidth. We can sit with folks that are in a hard place, and we have a container or a vessel that's large enough to hold space with them without overreacting or feeling overly burdened, and just be present with people with wherever they're at. And I found myself really not having the emotional bandwidth, being quickly frustrated or quickly irritated, even something as silly as driving in traffic and recognizing that someone in front of me wasn't going the pace I wanted them to go, became a thing. Mm-hmm. It became a thing. You might laugh away and say, well, a lot of us do that, but it was chronic. Yeah. I found myself struggling with sleep in the right rhythm.
Isn't that interesting? You think you'd be tired, but it
I had
begets bad habits, right?
I had no problem getting to sleep. Mm-hmm. I was exhausted when I hit the pillow. And I think I've heard a lot of people say I had a hard time staying asleep. Mm-hmm. And so, boy, I'd hit that pillow and I'd be out in about 10 seconds. But at 2 a.m, I would be awake, and as awake could be. Mm-hmm. So you bring all those symptoms, and really also just this sense that I wasn't connecting with God in a deep way. Yeah. I was going through the motions. I'm in the Word to study it, but not to experience who God really is. And I just was kind of doing it out of rote, if I'm really honest, in that season.
Yeah. Brian, to some extent, you've started to share, but what would be a few anchor either habits or ideas, suggestions you might have for the audience as to how to avoid getting ourselves into a period of overcommitment and maybe burnout, or just something general that you learned during this season?
Yeah, there would be a number of things I would say. Number one is it is important, and I told this as part of my journey here, to have some people that have a full lens into your life, whoever that is. Ideally, of course, in my case, it was my spouse, but also some partners here in the business. But there's a tendency to want to hide when we get into hard seasons. We tend to want to hide. We tend to want to run. We retreat to the dark corners. And I wanted to do that too. I wanted to hide that from the world. And I think one of the things is we have to have a spot where someone has a full lens on the scope of who we are. So number two is, no matter what your flesh may tell you. I was raised in a culture, we all were, to believe that my body was really primarily a tool. It's something I use, that it serves me. So, you're playing football and you break your pinky, you come off, you splint it, you go back in the game, you just, whatever it is, we just use our bodies because they're tools. And just to understand that our bodies, as everything else, is a gift that God has given us for his glory, his purpose, and to really treat it that way. And I had never thought about the depth of God's invitation to care for this body that he's given me for his glory. And probably most foundationally is that I think all of us need to find a rhythm in life where there is a space where we are sitting and we are quieting our souls and actually finding our deepest place to actually just be with God, to be still, to be silent, whatever that looks like. Because it's in that space where we really begin to hear for our deepest longings, to hear from God. When Parker
Talking
Palmer,
about listening even more than
absolutely
putting forth
listening,
effort
right? Absolutely, it's a listening posture. Parker Palmer, who's an author, who wrote a book, Let Your Life Speak. He says, our soul is like a wild animal. And he says something like, you when you go out in the woods to find a wild animal, you don't go stomping around in the woods expecting you're going to come upon a wild animal. What you do is you sit quietly and in a prolonged way, and you wait, and the animal comes to you. It appears. Our souls work much the same. And in that season, that felt so counterintuitive that I had to slow down and be still to accomplish all these things that were on my list that were beyond my doing. But those are some principles. And I think all of those things are not just for folks that are experiencing overload or burnout, if you want to use that term. I think they're foundational principles and truths for our lives in whatever God's called us into.
Yeah. Thank you. One last question for you, Brian, as you think about the next season, and what you've learned and what you're learning and how you've been transformed and are being transformed. What is a hope or a dream or a passion you have for how to continue to use your gifts moving forward?
Jerry, that's a great question. Our lives move in seasons. And I have learned that. We've all learned that. We all know that to be true. Some seasons are longer than others, but God designed us for seasons, for some things to end and for some things to begin. And I think that's something that I've learned, and I get excited about whatever the next season is, because all the things that God has brought into my life through pain, through loss, and through wonderful experiences, I look to the next season as a gift of how do I make myself available in deeper and deeper ways for those first closest to me, my adult kids, their spouses, grandchildren, but also in concentric circles for friends, but even for others in the world and clients that we serve here at North Group. The privilege of sitting in even deeper spaces, right, is to me is thrilling and exciting. We do beautiful work here. God has knit together a great team, and this kind of work is gospel. It's kingdom work, and the ability to sit with folks in deeper and deeper places and help them discover what is true of them. That thrills me as I think about the future as we do this together.
Well, I enjoy working alongside Brian Black. I'm so thankful for our time today. I feel like even though we've been friends for 15 or more years, I've learned some. I've certainly been inspired, and I'll be reflecting on these topics. So thank you very much, Brian. It's been great to have you.
Jerry, thanks so much. You're a great friend. I'm just grateful.